Good evening. My name is Sebastian Braxton, and this is my uh, vlog on my scavenger hunt article for week 3. The title of my article is Money in the Bank Feeling Power Increases Saving. Um, and I particularly chose this article because of a project that I'm working with professionally that involves savings and marketing towards those who tend to undersave. And so I was really interested in the title because I feel like it presents a compelling strategy for a marketing approach to encouraging those who this business particular venture want to get involved in savings. Um, Andrew Jackson said that money is power. Um, and even though that was about 200 years ago, the authors of this article suggest that the more and more research that takes place, the more that this actually comes out to be true. Um, the first thing that they establish as they build a case for why this question is important is the connection between money and power. They initially draw upon Keltner and Langner from an article that they posted in the Encyclopedia of Social Psychology on the definition of power. And in that particular article, they are citing the fact that Keltner and Langner draw upon the idea or illustrate the idea that money is a big source of power, and it can function as a means by which people feel powerful or gain power over others. Um, they also quote Furnham in an article that he wrote called The Psychology of Money Usage. And in this article, they're again building this connection of money and power in order to establish the idea that possessing money makes one feel powerful. So, on one hand, money can be a source of power in social psychology. On another hand, possessing money can make one actually feel powerful just by having the money itself, which will obviously lend itself towards their goal of showing the connection of power and savings, which is increasing how much money that you possess. Through this establishment, they begin to talk about how money and savings is very lowly done among particular groups and certain demographics based on their familial background, their education level, um, and other items that are very commonly known as to why people don't save. And so they felt that the predominant question by establishing this concept of this connection between money and power is that if feeling powerful also will prompt an increased willingness to save money. And they felt that this question was important because people are likely to feel powerful or powerless on a daily basis. This is something that happens to people very regularly. And secondly, they noticed that most Americans save too little even after the financial crisis of 2008, that this problem of savings is still very low. As they begin to build a scholarly background of this subject and the ideas surrounding their particular research question of the connection of feeling of power, does that increase a person's desire to save? They first start off with the idea and the concept that power is a psychological state that can be manipulated. And as a result of that, a lot of their sources are actually quoting from various psychologists or psychological journals and social psychologists. Like Keltner and Langer, they actually quote them at least three different times in the literature review section. And so they're first dealing with the fact that power in and of itself is a psychological state, and they subscribe to that particular view. And not only is it a psychological state, but the fact that it is a psychological state makes it something that can be manipulated. And therefore, they give a lot of time and space to establishing the idea of power as an asymmetric control over a valued resource. That resource is usually most commonly money, which they establish later on as well. but it can be anything else from a particular car to influence to having knowledge like a medical doctor and a patient. They also build upon this idea of how social psychology and psychology is developed on the ideas of power. And one of the things that they note is that the feeling powerful actually causes individuals to view their present and future selves as overlapping. So the effect of self-perception and the concept of time as it relates to the feeling of power is very significant because they're trying to build this connection between saving money and the feeling of power, which saving would automatically require a particular amount of time. Um, I found this to be actually quite interesting because the opposite was said of those who feel powerless actually leads them to view their future selves as a completely separate person. And one of the things that they cited from several psychologists and the Journal of Consumer Behavior and Consumer Research articles is that this feeling of feeling powerful leads one to want to maintain their current state of power, and therefore they see this future person as themselves. There's a kind of an overlap. I need to find ways to continue because once you have power, it's this asymmetric control over a valued resource, then you want to maintain that. Versus a person who is powerless, they want to see themselves in the future as a person who will feel powerful, and therefore they will see that individual as a separate person. And this leads to several different um, hypotheses that they established, five of them, that is developed on the basis of this scholarly research in psychology, social psychology, in the Journal of Consumer Research, and how that overlaps into business. And that leads them to say, well, then, if a person who is feeling powerful sees their future and present selves as overlapping, then they're more likely to have a high incentive to save than a person who doesn't feel powerful because they want to maintain their current state. That is their incentive. But they establish other hypotheses, such as, if money is not a resource that will allow them to maintain their power, then obviously their incentive to save will be less. Or for a person who is feeling powerless, if saving money will lead them to accumulating power or becoming a going to a place of feeling of power, then they will have a greater sense incentive to save, and therefore that effect of the feeling of power on saving will be null and void. And so they set pretty good parameters, and I felt like it was well built off of the scholarly research. I found that their citations were not conducted in a proper APA style. It was typically just the author's last name and year. Um, and as I noted earlier, I felt like they drew very heavily upon the Journal of Consumer Research and a lot of social psychologists as well. And I think that's appropriate because it fits within the um, psychological, social psychological tradition of communication. Heavy emphasis on the individual, why this particular person does this, and the state of mind and the thoughts that lead to those behaviors, because they're connecting that. And they also noted in the article that they felt like this was theoretically contributing something, um, as well as practically leading to figuring out ways to actually increase people's willingness to save. Those who have feelings of powerlessness and how you can help them to feel powerful and empower them, which would actually lead them to save more money.